To stay on top of the wave, I'm looking for solutions that help optimize my working process, and in this way reduce the time of the production of the final product. One of such solutions is a Project Manager plugin. Project Manager helps systemize fragmented CG content. This is a convenient solution when models and textures are on different local and network drives of your computer. Via Project Manager, I get access to my content through one entry point. I don't need to surf folders and drivers in Windows Explorer. I am looking for the content I need for the project without leaving 3D Max space. Of course, nobody will make a library more convenient for me. And from time to time, I need to systemize it and add directories to Project Manager. After a while, the time I spend searching for a new model texture and model reduces significantly. But the advantages of this plugin is not only that it helps get a quick access to the content, but also that this content can be processed, prepare a preview for it, link texture files to 3Ds and Max files, and other things. I will begin my review with these features and tell you about Batch Render and Relink. Batch Render and Relink is included into a standard Project Manager installation package. After installing the plugin, you can access the utility both directly and through a Project Manager's context menus. That is, in any directory, if we want, for example, to render a preview for a model, we add the needed file through the menu. Add to Batch Render and Relink, and it appears in the utility that we are talking about now automatically. You can get access directly, that is, by clicking the appropriate section of the menu. This utility allows you to process 3D models of various formats that are supported in 3D Max in batches. All these formats are specified. The tab, of course, shows the most relevant formats, but this menu can be customized and additional formats not included in the list via Edit option can be specified. Apart from batch processing of 3D models, there is a possibility to relink and render previews for materials libraries and IES files. Here you can activate and deactivate relevant sections for further work with materials and the materials library and IES files. Customize menu. There are the following options in Customize menu. This is logging, where you can enable or disable logging and go directly to the review of those records. In case of failure, these logs will be useful for sending to the developer through creating a support request in Help menu. Here is a Help menu. We create a request. Here you can also attach a log file. Next, it switches the user interface of the utility from the dark to the light scheme. For assets, Render Settings option sends me to Render Systems set up for Batch Render. I will talk about these settings in detail later. Preferences tab. Through it, you can configure the utility's action during the collection of texture files and specify what to do if the file names match. Either copy and rename automatically, or display an additional dialog to make some decision, or keep the old path, and so on. You can also enable a backup option as protection against inattention. Also activate the option to delete unused shaders in the scene from the Materials Editor. Additionally, you can disable logging for relinking and disable bitmap proxies function. Bitmap proxies were needed when the amount of RAM did not allow to work with high-resolution textures. So it's not so relevant anymore, and by enabling this option, you can deactivate bitmap proxies for speeding up the relink. Via Help tab, you can also go to the file where the main functions are described, or go to a developer's website to watch lessons on this utility, and, as I said earlier, to form a support request if something went wrong. Now let's move from theory to practice. First, let's consider the work of the utility on the example of processing 3D models. Most often, for batch processing, I use Batch Search and Collect option. Here is this option. Let's look at it in details. Batch Search and Collect. Here is a simple example of how this operation saves me time. Working on projects, I often add 3D models from the library into the scene. But if you use network or distributive rendering, and also try to send a calculation to a remote render farm, it is quite possible that problems will arise. So, you need to monitor textures right away, at the initial stage of project development. But no matter what I do, no matter how I upload the model into the scene, there will always be a problem with incorrect or missing texture paths. And redefining these paths will take time. The Batch Search and Collect option automatically collects and links all textures to 3D's max files, which will save my time in the future, saving my work progress from the routine relink operations. How this works. Start. Here, as we are working only with 3D models, I removed checkbox from Materials and IES, leaving only 3D models. Copy the path to the needed folder. Add. Done. The path is written. You can specify an unlimited number of folders. But in that case, it is better to leave performing this operation for the night. Because even though it is a quick procedure, such an amount will take quite a long time in total. And briefly about the ideal, in my opinion, structure of the folder with the models. This is the most ideal preferable situation. A folder with textures, 3D max scene, and a preview to it. In theory, this is all that should be in the collection folder. If the textures are in a different place, or no one knows where, then in search directories, here is this tab. You can additionally specify the location of the search with the likely location of the textures. If you know it, then ignore this area and click Start for relinking. Here the previously opened scene will ask, we don't want to save it. Click. And the process is started. That's it. The process of linking is finished. To make sure that everything is okay, you can upload any file from the folder. Let's take this one. Perfect. Let's look at the more complicated cases, when there is a need to use collect files procedure and how it makes life easier in various non-standard situations. Collect files operation collects all textures in one folder. The most important in this option, for me personally, is an automatic rename of duplicate texture files. This option is especially relevant when sorting custom models. Not all authors bother with unique texture names, and often you can find file names such as 1, 01, 05, 5, and they can be repeated from model to model. In such cases, the combination of textures in one folder for a group of models causes, let's say, some difficulties. Here is an example of such situation. 96 models, each in its own folder. I understand why it was done like this. Because the models in this batch have enough non-unique names of texture files to cheerfully and enthusiastically rename and reassign them manually, you need to be very patient. Now I will make a search. Here is a situation. We don't need to go far for an example, or do we? No, we don't. Here it is. 2, 2, 1, 1, 3, 3, 04, 04, 4, 4, 5, 5. Well, I think that further in the list, something is also likely to be duplicated somewhere. For a long time, I did not know how to organize this and similar batches and start using them comfortably in projects. There was a batch, but there was no use for it. With the help of Collect Files option, I could remodel these batches according to my standards. The remodeling procedure is as follows. Activate Collect Files option and disable everything else. To start the procedure of the file collection first, show the path to the folder. Then when activating Collect Files option, Collect Path section appears. Here you need to specify the folder for collecting textures. I don't have it at the moment. I am creating a folder with such a name. Now here it is. That's it. Click Start and wait for a procedure to be finished. The process is over. What have we got as a result? All the textures are collected in one folder, and duplicate names were renamed. In the beginning, we had a few files named 5. Now we have files named 5 copy, just as 5. 4 copy, 04 copy. And all this, of course, was relinked. You are lucky if there were previews for the models. Then you can move them to Project Manager Catalog right away. If I didn't get such a present, then I move to the next stage of content processing, to batch render. For batch render, it is better to prepare several folders and leave their rendering for the night to use time in an optimal way. The batch render procedure is simple, just like relinking. You need to choose a folder with prepared models and press Start. If you have done relinking before, then it's enough to put checkboxes where necessary. Make sure that the destination folder is active, then remove checkbox from Collect Files. You can actually just remove it from Batch, Search, and Collect. Activate checkbox Batch Thumbnails Render. Skip Existing Thumbnails option tells us that the utility skipped the files that already have a preview. Since we don't have a preview, then this option will not influence the render and the work of the utility. In theory, everything can be done at the same time, both relinking and rendering. This is what the utility is for, as a matter of fact. But it doesn't mean that if you have such a possibility, you should use it. All convenience can simply be ruined by the human factor. Forgot to click something, forgot to reassign something. This is why I prefer to do everything step by step. This is safer and more reliable. But if you are confident in yourself, then you can activate the needed options, or a set of options, and start the task processing. Okay, I am clicking Start. Everything is ready. If for some reason you are not happy with the result, then you can customize rendering settings. Through Settings tab that is available from the main menu of Batch Render and Relink, or Render Settings Customizer, each type of content has its own settings block. For 3D models, it is the most advanced. There is a default scene view option that gives a possibility to render a preview of the model by the active viewpoint that was set while saving the scene. It can be both orthogonal projections and a perspective window. There is no guarantee that this will be the right view. I always use the override viewpoint and force the appropriate view. Override option is here, and the choice of viewpoint is here. As a rule, this is front right or left, but for chandeliers, it would be more appropriate to use the bottom view. Use all cameras in scene option gives a possibility to render one model from different cameras installed in the scene. Fit view option moves the viewpoint closer or further so that the whole model fits in the render area. Render Setup block allows you to select the desired render engine with render present pre-installed in it. If you do not like the final quality, it may seem quite low for aesthetics. But I personally don't have any complaints regarding the quality, because I think that it is enough to have general understanding about the model on the scene, and not bother with making the final picture for preview perfect. Nevertheless, if you don't like the final quality, you can upload your own preset. Open the scene with the Kstudio and upload preset. Set up the settings that you need. Save again and add the new present to the library. Use Scene Renderer option suggests to use the default render that is inside the max file. This may not always be good because the scene can be made in Corona or V-Ray, and the default render in this scene can be scanline. So the need for this option is not always justified. Output size option sets the size for previews. Everything here is obvious. Custom Studio option. We activate it through checkbox. Use Custom Studio. It allows you to assign your render studio for rendering previews. Here is a brief comment on how this whole thing is set up. If necessary, a more or less experienced user will cope with this task. render settings for shaders are almost the same. A shortened version of the top tab, so I will not duplicate the description. Here it's all the same. Well, the settings block for IES files is quite simple. Setting the intensity is the size for the preview. Additionally, you can install Override Gamma, different from system settings, and select the file type to save the preview. Now briefly about working with material libraries and IES files. Now I will briefly examine the possibilities of batch processing the library of materials. In fact, the possibilities are the same for the model processing. It is also possible to search and collect textures for shaders, and after relinking make previews for them. I will not talk about the possibility of relinking again. In addition, directly in the Project Manager, the functionality for working with shaders is much wider. Rendering process is the same as for 3D models. When rendering, if there is only one shader in the library file, only one preview will be rendered. If the file contains a group of shaders, then a preview will be made for each shader separately. How does this happen in practice? For the review, I put a library of materials into the temporary folder. I copy the path to it. Choose the option Materials, add the folder. The Batch, Search, and Collect option is disabled because I am confident in my library and I know all the textures are there. The path to them is written. It is enough to press Start. Great. What happens in the end when the render is over? A new folder with the same name as the library file appears in the folder with the library, where there is a preview. I will come back to this folder in the final part of this review. Now I'll move on to working with IES files. Everything is much simpler with IES files. They do not need any maintenance, and for them you can immediately render a preview. But there is no practical sense in it if there is a Project Manager, because Project Manager allows you to interactively render previews to IES files. To test this option, I will still run for rendering one of the folders with IES files, and will show the results. Setting the render is no different. We choose a path, select the needed option, add the path to the utility, and start rendering. There are hundreds of IES files in the folder, maybe more. So I'll not wait for the finish of the rendering, but just stop by pressing the Escape button. That's it. Previews are ready. If we consider Batch Render and Relink utility as an independent application, then its use will positively affect the workflow of a whole. With its help, all library files will immediately be ready for use, and they can easily be merged to the project in any convenient way. Surfing the directory with files will also be facilitated by ready-made previews. Here is an example of those cushions that we prepared. All previews are calculated, and you can choose the appropriate 3D model for your project. If the utility is considered in conjunction with the project manager, then the difference will be that it becomes more convenient to work on the project, since I will not leave the 3D Max workspace. In order to do this, place all prepared directories in the appropriate sections of the project manager. Let's create. Well, I have already created a directory, and add to this directory a folder with cushions. Further work with models is just enjoyable. By double-clicking the preview, or by simply dragging the model into the viewport, it merges into the scene. Here is a smiley. That's it. Double-click and model is in my scene. It also works with the other models that have already been prepared. Double-click and the model is in the scene. Close Project Manager. What is convenient, just in case, you can check the situation with the textures and make sure that they are all in place and have the OK status. And this is logical. All directories have been prepared beforehand. The profit of this utility and the project manager in general is obvious. With little time spent on the organization and the preparation of content, later a huge amount of time is freed up when working on a project. Back to the library of materials. Which previews were rendered previously? It looks like this. As I said, I do not feel much need to organize the materials. That's why this directory is empty. The tab with IES files looks like this. I didn't talk about it right away, but IES file rendering is actually not needed if a project manager is installed, which supports interactive rendering for photometric files. It is enough to specify the path to the folder with IES files. In separate reviews, I will examine in detail the functionality of each tab of the project manager. Have fast renders! See you!